Hey, welcome to Janktown. Will here, and thanks for hanging out. Today we'll be doing an early primer on one of these spoiled legendary commanders from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Ojer Axonil, Deepest Might. He's a 4-mana value 4/4 mono-red god with trample, and he has an ability that reads if a red source we control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ojer Axonil's power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ojer Axonil's power instead. Then, when Ojer Axonil dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. The backside is a land that taps for 1 red, and if we pay 3 and tap it, we can then transform it back to its front side, but only if red sources we control has dealt 4 more non-combat damage this turn, and only at sorcery speed. Really interesting commander, and I think it's gonna be a popular one. But before we break down our deck, I hope you can leave a like, share, and subscribe, because it really helps the channel out. And with that out of the way, let's get into this deck analysis. The first step in building our deck is figuring out the role of our commander. And Ojer Axonil pretty much reads like a build around, in that a lot of our cards will probably synergize pretty well with him, and without him, the deck might not run as well. His abilities obviously point us towards non-combat damage, and red has a lot of ways in doing that. However, what we'd want are repeatable ways to be able to deal non-combat damage, because red is the color that's least known for card draw, and so we don't want to just keep consuming our resources and just run out of gas. Another cool thing about him though is that even if we deal small amounts of damage, it'll immediately go up based on his power. So obviously we want to increase his power and do it in a way that can be done efficiently so that we have enough mana to keep doing our non-combat shenanigans. Something to keep in mind though is that Ojer Axonil will probably have a high heat index. And what does this mean? He's probably kill on sight, because as soon as he hits the board, he just might end games, which means we probably don't want to run him out immediately. We want to set up our board first so that when he comes down, he can have a big impact on the game. Now, gods usually come with some type of resilience, like the Theros gods came with indestructible, the Amonkhet ones would like tuck themselves third from the top or something like that. In Ojer's case, he turns into a land, and we're gonna have to deal 4 non-combat damage in order to get him back. So while that might sound difficult, especially in a deck that'll primarily deal damage in like small amounts, it's actually not that bad. You see, with the way it's worded, we don't have to deal damage exclusively to our opponent. Meaning, if we have a spell that says like, deal 1 damage to all players, that'll be total of 4 non-combat damage going around the table, and hey, we're back in business. Last thing to watch out for though are non-bows. Now, what do I mean by this? Ojer's ability is a replacement effect, meaning if we have multiple instances of these like going on at once, it'll be the affected player that'll determine how they enter the stack. So let's say we have a damage tripler, and let's say we have Ojer. If we have something that deals 1 damage, we might be thinking that we'll deal 1, we'll bring it to 4 because of Ojer's power, and then we'll triple that. Now we're dealing 12. But since it's the player who's getting affected that'll determine how those things enter the stack, what they can do is they take the 1, then they'll triple it to 3, and since that's less than Ojer's power, it'll just go up to 4. So just something to keep in mind, I don't want us running cards that'll like accidentally not work the way we think they should. Next up, I'll go into card choices that fall under the deck's 7 different themes, and we'll have our usuals of ramp, removal, and draw, but I'll kick us off with the power up, burn, punish, and something we like to call UBP, or utilities, bombs, and pets. We'll start with cards that can increase Ojer's power efficiently, that can then set us up for the big turn. Hero's Blade and Grafted War Gear both equip for free, and they increase Ojer's power by 3, while Champion's Helm and Bone Splitter equip only for 1, and they increase Ojer's power by 2. Champion's Helm also gives Hexproof, which is just a nice little bonus since we want to keep Ojer around. Naginata and Stitcher's Graft both increase Ojer's power by 3, and they only equip for 2. So you can see the math that we're using here, where we want damage positive or power positive cards. Imperial Plate and Hand of Vecna can make Ojer really big depending on how many cards we have in our hand. They only equip for 2, or in the Hand of Vecna's case, we can just pay life to equip it for free. Finally, Arcane Teachings, a 3-mana value aura that gives Ojer +2/+2, and if we tap him, he now becomes a pinger, essentially dealing 6. For burn, we want repeatable sources of non-combat damage, and Sawblade Scamp, Spear Spewer, and Blister Spit Gremlin are all 1-drops that can tap and essentially deal damage to the whole board. Thermal Alchemist, Brimstone Trebuchet, and Unruly Catapult all pretty much do the same thing, although at higher mana values. They are better blockers, and don't sleep on this Trebuchet. Even if we can't untap him because we're not playing any Knights, I think the reach will pay dividends. Kessig Flame Breather is a 2-drop that's also a decent blocker at 1/3, and whenever we play a non-creature spell, which we're going to be playing a lot of, it will deal 1 damage to each opponent. It won't be surprising if this can trigger like once, twice, or even thrice in a turn. At the top end of our burn curve is Inferno Titan. When it ETBs or when it attacks, it deals 3 damage that we can divide, meaning we can deal 1 damage to each opponent, and with Ojer out, that means there'll be at least 4 damage coming their way. Outside of permanents though, Fiery Confluence and Mana Clash are a couple of cards that I think will do a lot of work. Fiery Confluence is just really versatile. Like if we need a mini wipe, we need to destroy some artifacts, like it's great. But really, we want it for its deal 2 damage to each opponent. We can choose this mode thrice, and each mode is a separate instance on the stack, meaning with Ojer out, even at base form, it deals 4 and then 4 and then 4. Mana Clash is a really janky card, and I don't know, man. I think it looks sweet. It only deals 1 damage to us whenever our coin comes up tails, but if an opponent does it and we have Ojer out, it will deal at least 4 for every time they hit tails. Last on the list is Pyrohemia, and this is an all-star in this deck. Because every time we pay a red, it puts 1 instance of damage on the stack. Now, normally we would just treat this like, you know, you pay 4, you deal 4 to everything. But since Ojer cares about every instance of damage, it'll actually deal at the base minimum 16 damage to our opponents while dealing 4 to everything else on the battlefield. Now, burn is good, but we want to support it with other sources of non-combat damage. Punishing our opponents for doing stuff are Sardine Avenger, Harsh Mentor, and Rampaging Ferocidon. Sardine Avenger gets out of control pretty quick. First Strike and Trample actually make it harder to deal with than it looks. And there's so many artifacts now that hit the graveyard, from treasures to clues to food and, you know, whatever other artifact synergy there is. Harsh Mentor can be hit or miss depending on your opponents, but when it works, it's pretty painful to deal with. And Rampaging Ferocidon will now just punish these token decks or these go-wide decks, and it has a very important clause, which is that players can't gain life. Now, we're punishing our opponents for doing stuff. Let's also just punish them for playing their spells. Pyrostatic Pillar, Spell Shock, and Cemetery Gatekeeper all punish our opponents whenever they play some type of spell. The Pillar punishes people for playing small spells, Spell Shock punishes players for playing any spell, and the Gatekeeper, we probably want to exile a creature with this because they usually make up the bulk of players' decks, but even when they play a land, it also hurts them. Now, speaking of lands, Burning Earth and Mana Barbs are ways to punish opponents for even just tapping their lands. Burning Earth is actually pretty underrated because so many players play non-basics now these days, and I can't blame them. There's so many non-basics that are good. So having this out with any other combination the other ones definitely puts a clock, especially with Ojer out. Lastly, we want to punish players for just taking their turn, and Roiling Vortex and Sulfuric Vortex punish players on their upkeep, and they both have very important clauses of not letting opponents gain life. Now, with all that hot, sexy stuff out of the way, we gotta eat our veggies. For ramp, we have Soul Ring, Signet, Bob of Silverstone. Nothing here you haven't seen before, but I do like Ruby Medallion and Defiler of Instinct as ways to discount our spells. We are playing a bunch of permanents in terms of creatures, enchantments, things like this, and every time we do, we get to ping one thing. Hopefully a player, deal him at least 4 to the face. Descent into Avernus and Glittering Stockpile are just some solid 3-drop mana rocks. I'd say mana rock because Descent it puts a serious clock on the game. Descent snowballs pretty quick, so it can even outpace our Ojer, but something to keep in mind, even when it's just at 2 counters or something, is that it deals damage. Glittering Stockpile, just a great card. I mean, I like it. It's quirky, and we can sort of cash in later for a bunch of treasures. Jessica's Will, another really good card, really gets us ahead. Not much to say about this one. But I do like Throne of Eldraine. We're playing mono red, meaning we're probably gonna choose red, and having 4 mana for 5 is a pretty good rate, but I'm also interested in being able to draw 2 cards, because red doesn't really have that much access to card draw. Last on our ramp card list is Neheb the Eternal. This guy makes a crazy amount of mana, given how much damage we want to deal, but even if he only makes like 3 or something, I think that's a decent enough ritual to be able to play some extra spells that we normally wouldn't be able to. For removal, we're going a bit light, and we're really playing staples here. Chaos Warp, Vandal Blast, and instead of going Blasphemous Act, I went with Delayed Blast Fireball. I don't know, I value being able to keep our creatures, and on top of that, it also deals damage to opponents. So it's just a really versatile spell, and I think it fits really well in this deck. However, a sneaky good card, I think, is Earthquake. So we can just pay 1 in X, and with Ojer out, it already deals 4 damage to each player. 2 mana deal 4 to each opponent, pretty good. However, in a pinch, we can pump a lot into X if we really just need this big sweeper to just clear the board. We are dumping our hand a lot though, so we gotta make sure that we have enough gas to close out the game. Faithless Looting, Thrill of Possibility, which is smart. This is about as good as red card draw gets. We gotta discard to be able to then draw cards. Fair. However, we do have access to Wheels, and Wheel of Misfortune can draw as a new 7, and at the same time it deals damage. So it's just really synergistic, I think, with Ojer. However, those are one-time effects, and so we're gonna need some type of consistent card advantage as well. Treasure Map, I think, is underrated. You know, we get to scry 1, decent, but it also makes treasure, and when it flips, we can sack those treasures to draw cards. So I think it's decent. Outpost Siege is another source of consistent card advantage, and our curve's pretty low, so hopefully whatever we exile off the top, we'll be able to play pretty consistently. Lastly, red is really good at impulse draw, and so Light Up the Stage, Reckless Impulse, French Resolve, and Virtue of Courage are all means of being able to exile cards and then play them for value. Virtue of Courage also has the adventure side if we just really need that bit of extra burn damage, but being able to exile so many cards off the top of our library to essentially like let us storm off is a pretty powerful effect. UVP time! Ojer's really important to our game plan, so we can keep him safe by putting on some Greaves. However, aside from keeping Ojer safe, we also need to keep ourselves safe, and so Silent Arbiter and Crawl Space are just means to be able to mitigate damage. We aren't really looking to go into combat, and so these like anti-combat effects don't really affect us that much. Tectonic Giant is a pretty versatile card. Whenever it attacks, we get to deal 3 to each opponent, maybe 4 or more if Ojer's out, as well as being able to exile the top 2 cards of our library, again giving us some needed card advantage. Burn Down the House is a versatile spell. Again, it could be a wipe, but it could also create these devils that are just gonna be like super annoying to deal with, especially if we have Ojer out. And we're also playing a Planeswalker in Chandra, Torch of Defiance. So this card kind of does everything, right? It gives us card advantage, it lets us burn our opponents, it lets us ramp, it lets us shoot down a creature, and the emblem, I don't think we're really activating this. It's not a red source, but still being able to deal 5 damage for any spell is pretty game ending. And the last card of the deck is, well, I went with a jank pick here, Call in a Professional. It's a 3 mana value instant where players can't gain life this turn, damage can't be prevented this turn, and you get to deal 3 to any target. So as a burn spell, it's kind of like, not that great. But if people are playing the Wondering, yo, you better call in a professional. And that wraps up our early primer on Ojer Axonil Deepest Night. Now if you enjoyed this video and this deck tech, I hope you can show some love by leaving a like as well as a subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I'm always humbled by the support that you guys are able to show the channel. It really helps keep this whole MTG Janktown thing going. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, stay inspired, friends, and I'll see you soon.